Churchill's appetite for spending was legendary among those who knew him. Unfortunately, his spending habits came at a price, and most of his life he was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Churchill's father, Lord Randolph, was known for his wide circle of Jewish friends, including members of the Rothschild banking dynasty, along with Sir Ernest Cassel. Upon Lord Randolph's death, those Jewish friends took pity on Churchill, helping him both career-wise and financially. Cassel offered to manage Winston's finances after the death of his father. A Prussian-born Ashkenazi Jew, he became a wealthy banker and capitalist after he moved to Britain around 1869. He gained a credible reputation within London's financial institutions, equaling that of the Rothschilds. He looked after the financial affairs of the Prince of Wales, later to become Edward VII. So when Randolph died, he thought it necessary to look after Winston's affairs too, free of charge. After the Boer War, which turned Churchill into a minor celebrity, he went on a lecture tour, boasting about his heroic escape and the battles he was involved in. This proved to be highly successful financially, bringing him over $1 million in today's money. By 1910, he was back to square one, having spent most of his savings. In 1920, Churchill overextended himself on the purchase of 2 properties. He leaned on Cassel for financial assistance, which came forthwith. Fortunately for Churchill, Cassel died a year later, and his executors never asked for the money back. In 1921, a surprise inheritance materialised from a distant relative over in Ireland. As part of the old aristocracy, his relative left him the equivalent of $5 million in today's money. Delighted at this, both Churchill and his wife Clementine breathed a huge sigh of relief, believing their money worries were over. But by 1925, most of that money had gone on extravagant living, gambling and excessive drinking. When Churchill was given the ministerial role of Chancellor of the Exchequer, he had to balance his own business affairs by selling his shares and paying off his debtors, which unfortunately left Churchill in a financial mess. To his unpleasant surprise, he found himself once again in debt with a huge tax liability. Churchill's debts really began to spiral out of control throughout the wilderness years of the 1930s. Having no ministerial position, he relied mainly on his writings and public appearances. This was nowhere near enough to hold his position, and he sank further into debt. According to David Irving, during these wilderness years, a secret slush fund known as the Focus was created by a small selection of London's wealthiest businessmen who had ties to the board of Jewish deputies in England, led by Sir Bernard Cohen. The group was set up as a countermeasure against the rise of German National Socialism. Irving states that the Focus Group continued to finance Churchill during the 1930s, while he promoted anti-German rhetoric along with warnings associated with Germany's rise to power. By March 1938, Churchill was once again in danger of bankruptcy. He turned to an old friend, Brendan Bracken, for help, a Conservative MP, a businessman and founder of the modern version of the Financial Times. Bracken had many contacts in the business and banking world and was able to arrange a meeting for Churchill with a wealthy admirer by the name of Henry Strakosch. Strakosch was an Austrian-born Jewish banker, businessman and economist who became a British citizen in 1907. He admired Churchill's stance on Germany and thought it necessary to keep Churchill afloat and in the political game. He signed a cheque over to Churchill for the equivalent of $1 million in today's money, with no repayment requirements necessary. When Churchill became Prime Minister in May 1940, his salary doubled to £10,000, $500,000 in today's money. This was still nowhere near enough to keep him afloat. At that time he had the bank manager and his creditors knocking on his door for an immediate payment of interest on his £5,602 overdraft, which is £280,000 in today's money. Once again Henry Strakosch stepped forward with another cheque, clearing Churchill's overdraft. Strakosch died in October 1943, leaving Churchill the equivalent of $1 million in today's money, plus the cancellation of a loan. The need for Churchill to rely on outside sources to support his out-of-control spending habits is worrying, because the opportunity for abuse of power and manipulation of the individual is greatly increased. The borrower is always slave to the lender. There is no compromise to this fact. I suspect without this debt element surrounding Churchill, his creditors would have had no leverage or use for him. On October the 29th, 1929, 5 days after Black Thursday, the start of the Great Wall Street crash, Churchill was guest of honour at a bazaar celebration attended by over 40 banksters and master plungers of Wall Street at the Fifth Avenue mansion of Bernard Baruch. Bernard Baruch was born to a Jewish family in Camden, South Carolina in 1870. At the age of 10, the family moved to New York. Baruch began his career as a broker and by the age of 30 had amassed a huge personal fortune from speculating on sugar markets. He was nicknamed the Lone Wolf of Wall Street, and by 1910 he had become one of New York's most famous investors. During World War I, Baruch left Wall Street to pursue a career advising the wartime president, Woodrow Wilson. Baruch also accompanied President Wilson at the Paris Peace Conference at the end of World War I, serving on the Committee of Form and Payments of Reparations. After the conclusion of the Paris Peace Conference, Baruch tried to help the Senate pass the Treaty of Versailles. We know that Churchill was a Freemason, becoming a member of the Stodholm Lodge in 1901. There is a certain amount of speculation that Bernard Baruch was also part of some form of Masonic Lodge network. Although the evidence for this is scarce, he does seem to have a connection to the Jewish network known as B'nai B'rith, a large Jewish organisation based on the Masonic Lodge model. On October the 7th, 1958, B'nai B'rith, at their 115th annual meeting in New York, held a 3-day Farley in honour of Bernard Baruch. At that time the 88-year-old was to be cited for what they considered to be his imprint on future generations. According to Georges Hatton, in his book Advanced Demolition League, the ADL in Action, he points out that back in the early years of the B'nai B'rith's own publications, they offered the following information concerning the origins of the organisation. Their reunions were frequent, and several of them, being members of Freemasons and Oddfellows, they finally concluded that a somewhat similar organisation, but based on the Jewish idea, would best obtain their object. The Jewish religion has many observances and customs corresponding to the secret societies known to us. The synagogue, for instance, might be compared to a lodge room. It used to be open twice a day. For a Jew desiring to find a friend, they had but to go there and make themselves known by a certain sign and token. The sign consisted of a grip with a full hand and the magical word Shalom Alachem. The mezuzah on the doorstep was the countersign. Shem's Israel was the password. Some people like Jews and some do not, but no thoughtful man can doubt the fact that they are, beyond all question, the most formidable and the most remarkable race who has ever appeared in the world. In 1904, Churchill changed party allegiance from the Conservatives to the Liberals and stood for Manchester North West, a seat where 1/3 of the voters were Jewish. He won his seat by opposing a bill limiting Jewish immigration into Britain. During this period, Churchill became friends with Chaim Weizmann, a Zionist leader who was instrumental in pressing for the Balfour Declaration and who would later become Israel's first president. In 1920, Churchill was given the task of overseeing the British mandate to enforce the Declaration, which would ultimately lead to the Jewish state of Israel. In March 1921, Churchill went to Palestine with Lawrence of Arabia to negotiate with the Arabs. He met with Amir Abdullah, an Arab sheikh, and made a deal separating the land between east and west of the Jordan. The Zionists were to be left alone in the west, while the east, Transjordan, was to become an Arab kingdom ruled by Abdullah. Over the next decade, Churchill allowed the Jews to purchase as much Palestinian land as they could afford. A few years after the Cairo conference, T.E. Lawrence lost interest in his military career and took early retirement. As a huge national hero, Lawrence had influence over those who respected and admired him. In 1935, he died in a mysterious motorbike accident, which many of his friends and admirers believed to be an assassination. During this period, he was aligning himself with Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British fascist movement. On the day of the accident, he was on his way to see his friend Henry Williamson, a Hawthornden Prize winner, who was negotiating a future meeting between Adolf Hitler and T.E. Lawrence. Churchill attended the funeral. In July 1922, Zionism came under threat in the House of Lords. They were unhappy about the Jewish proposal to build a power plant on the Jordan River, saying it would be a threat to Arab rights and that the Zionist project would become a burden to the British taxpayer. The Lords voted 60 to 29 to abolish the mandate and nullify the Balfour Declaration. Churchill stepped in and delivered a tremendous speech in the House of Commons, which effectively stopped the Lords' motion from going any further towards undermining Zionism. In 1840, Colonel Charles Henry Churchill, a British Army officer, diplomat, and a distant relative of Winston Churchill, championed the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine. He put together a plan for the concept of Zionism from the British consulate in Damascus, under Lord Palmerston's Foreign Office, half a century before Theodor Herzl appeared on the scene. After World War II, Britain only formally recognised the State of Israel after pressure was put on them by Churchill, to which he received a letter of thanks from his friend who became the first president of Israel, Chaim Weizmann. Churchill sent a reply, "I look back with pleasure on our long association. The light grows." The picture of Churchill becomes a little clearer once his association and involvement with Jewish international finance and Zionism is understood. One could say that they had a very useful relationship to one another and would scratch each other's backs when necessary. Dwight D. Eisenhower was born into a deeply religious Protestant family and, like Churchill, had pro-Zionist convictions. This helped Eisenhower throughout his career, especially when he was noticed by Bernard Baruch, another champion of Zionism. During this time they developed a deep friendship, to which Baruch would help in promoting Eisenhower's career, and as a result helped promote his own Zionist aspirations. It has been suggested that Baruch was behind Eisenhower's appointment as Supreme Allied Commander in Europe.